All right, class. Today we're gonna have a study note, the share note on the skeletal system. So I'm not gonna go into the complexity of or functionality of particular bone, but we're gonna go through actual anatomy of the bones of the skeletal system. So I have this cool 3D program. Thank you for Complete Anatomy 2021. I'm allowed to use that because I have a full license to use that. That's pretty cool system. So that also works with augmented reality. So I can have it on my micro on my phone, and I can project it like putting this skeleton on the table and look to the microphone and look in the camera. So my look at the phone, right? The phone is a camera. The phone is everything right now. So when walk around that the skeleton, so it has a great functionalities, right? So, but when you're working here, it's really good for students to understand that and to look at that. Again, I'm just gonna go over certain bones. Probably I'm gonna go through all of them, but I'm gonna create a very short abbreviations, right? Like short lecture, whatever we covered in class. So you can also dress that skeleton, for example, with muscular system muscles, right? So for example, I can give my skeleton, let's call the skeleton I don't know, Dima. My name is Dima, so that's the Dima, right? Muscles. That's how I look. I have a lot of and good big muscles, strong, right? Not true, right? So let me undress it. All right, skeletal system. So there are 206 bones. Do you really need to know all those 206 bones? No, not necessarily. So let's start with I like to start with a thoracic cage. So this is a thorax. So in the thoracic cage, we have 12 ribs. So let me add connective tissue for the purposes of this lesson. So there's a connective tissue, and you see this cartilage tissue, whatever, like shiny white thing here. So that right. So everything there's in green right now I can highlight. So it's connected to a breastbone. So you can call this as a breastbone, or for our class, it's a sternum. So the sternum has three parts: xiphoid process, plate, and manubrium. So they all connected, not all, some of them are connected to a sternum. So there are 12 ribs. So if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you see this is the seventh rib. Not everything that's highlighted because that way highlights everything. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me actually write on it, right? Can I write on it? Probably yes. If I'll bring my bars here, I'm gonna choose red, right? So 1, yes, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You see the seventh rib connected directly to the sternum. So this 7 ribs, we call them a true ribs because they connected directly to the sternum. So also we have, right? You see, when I move that, yes, I have to raise. So also, then I write rib number 7, then the rib number 8, 9, and 10. You see, they're also connected. So I will be jumping between these things, right? So this is 7, and now we have 8. I will circle 9 and 10, but they're not directly connected to the sternum. They connected to the sternum through the seventh rib. So all first 7 are the true ribs, and 8, 9, and 10 are false ribs. That's what we call them, false ribs, because they're not connected directly. They connected through the cartilage tissue into the 7th rib and then connected over there. So these are the false ribs. Erase, and then I have to work further down. And the last 2 ribs, you see, rib number. So if this is number 10, rib number 11 and 12. So there are altogether 12 ribs on one side and 12 on another side. So there are 24 ribs. So we already know 24 bones. So they're not connected to the sternum, but all of them are connected posteriorly. They connected to the vertebrates, to spinal column. So the first rib here is connected to the vertebrate called T1. T implies a thoracic, right? Thorax. So the T1 rib. We'll come back to the cervical, right? To the cervical ribs. So T1. And the last one, just because there are 12 ribs, I cannot write here, guys. So that's a pain. So, and the last one, yeah, I'm not going to write it from now on. So, and the last rib, rib number 12, right here, that floating rib, connected to the T2, I mean T12, I'm sorry, T12. So there are 12 thoracic ribs, T1 through T12, first rib connected to a T1 vertebrate, and the last one connected to T12. So then whatever is above and whatever is below, it's other sets of vertebrates. So that's why I wanted to start with the thoracic cage, and then we'll talk about the vertebrates. So the breastplate or the sternum with the manubrium and xiphoid process. So like when I click on it, so the xiphoid process, I cannot really highlight it by itself. So if I will click on the rib and I will go here and let me look at the axial skeleton. So everything that is in green, we call it an axial skeleton. Axial skeleton. And everything there is not green right now, it's called appendicular skeleton. Everything else that will be connected to the axial skeleton. So if I will click on humerus, appendicular. So now everything that is in green, appendicular skeleton. So there's axial skeleton and there's appendicular skeleton. So those appendages, they're connected to an axial skeleton. So T1, right? T1 and all the way T12, thoracic, rib cage. So let's go to the vertebrates now. So there are 24 vertebrates, but it depends how you calculate. It could be 24, it could be 26. And I will explain how, and then you can support your answer. So this is a C1 cervical, that's your neck, right? Cervical vertebrates. Starts with the C1, and there are 7 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the thoracic starts with T1 and so on. So there are 7 of them. So they're vertebrates, but these two first one, they have their own name. Let me remove connective tissue cartilage, right? So the first one is called atlas. So if I will hide others, atlas. So you see atlas looks like that. So we can see through the skull right now, atlas. So the atlas, just remember that the atlas supports the world, stands on his own and supports it. So the entire skull, right, that head of ours, skull, sits on top of the atlas. So that C1, first vertebrate, is called atlas. And the second one, the axial axis, right? So the axis, or the axial vertebrate axis. And all of the other ones are just C3, so it's C1, C2, C3, and so on. This bone that is sticking out from here, let me highlight this one, is called hyoid bone. Functionality of that bone in next lecture. So the hyoid bone. We're not talking about we're not describing functionality of these bones for now. So that's part of the axial skeleton. So this is a clavicle. So if I will click on appendicular, You see, the clavicle belongs to the appendicular skeleton. It belongs to the shoulder girdle. I always have a problem with pronouncing that. Shoulder, I can say it, but the girdle, whatever you hang on something, that's the shoulder girdle. So that's the clavicle and the scapula. So that's part of the appendicular skeleton. Let me unhighlight this. Can I? I don't know. Yes. So clavicle, that's this bone. Then in the back, posteriorly, it is a scapula. And the scapula articulates with the humerus or upper arm or brachii. So that's a humerus bone, upper limb. So the humerus articulates with two other bones. The medial bone, this medial bone is called ulna. Why it's called ulna? Now, if we look in the back, and I will isolate others or hide others, you see this tracular notch, or just think of this notch, looks like a moon, right? So that's why it's called ulna. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's some other all right. I had to stop for a second. I had to, right. So the medial bone. So the medial bone is the ulna. Medial, why it's medial? Because it is close to the medial line, right? That's where the medial line. And the lateral bone is a radius. So this is a radius. So both of them articulates, that's the forearm. Both of them articulates in the proximal region, they articulates with the humerus, and most towards the distal part, they articulate with the wrist. That's where the wrist is. So this collectively, all these 8 bones here are called carpal, right? Carpals. So this 5, so these are the carpals, 8. You don't really have to memorize them and know names of them. Trust me, you ask me, I will have to stop for a second and remember my mnemonic and then, right? Not important for this class. So now bones of your palm, that's your palm, not the entire hand, because that's your hand, right? So the palm are the five bones. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Just remember them as 5 bones. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these are carpals, and these 5 are called metacarpals. And if we go further, so now there are collectively 14 bones. We call them phalanges. That's your fingers, right? Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 14. Let's calculate. 1, 2, 3, count, and then calculate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So there are 14 phalanges, 5 metacarpals, 8 carpals, 2 bones of the forearm, and 1 bone of the upper arm. So the entire upper limb has 30 bones collectively. 30. So now you already know, so 24 here in the thorax, and then 30 here, and 12 of the vertebrae. 24. 24 of the vertebrates. We didn't discuss all of them. We just went through the cervical, then we went through thoracic, and then we're going to get to the lumbar. Somehow I skipped and I jumped another thing, but it's all right. So that's the upper limb. So let me come back to the axial skeleton. So that's where the thoracic T12 ends. And then the next third region or section starts with the lumbar vertebrates. So that's the L1, L2, L3, L4, L5. Lumbar. So if I will isolate and I will show it to you, hide others. So that's the lumbar vertebrate. And through this foramen, through this opening, that's where the spinal cord will feed through. spinal cord is gonna go through that. So if we count, and let me isolate the vertebral column and hide others, from here, from the first C1 cervical all the way to the lumbar L5, there are 24 vertebrates. They're similar shape, but they also different size, and the size increases if you see it. So the vertebral column is a convex and a concave to support the weight. Again, functionality, not talking about functionality. When if I hide others, you will see that shape is a little bit different from others. So we say that there are 26 vertebrates, but you can say that there are 24, starting from C1 all the way to C7, so it's 7. Then there are 12 of the thoracic vertebrates, and then there are 5 of the lumbar. If you will calculate 7 plus 12, 19, and 19 plus 5, 24. So sometimes we can say that there are 26, and on one of the slides, there are 26. Why there are 26? So now we can look at a sacrum or sacrum and the coccyx. You see, when I highlight that, they're all together. So these bones are fused. So like there's lines, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, but they're fused. And then when you look at the coccyx, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, they're fused as well. So they're all connected one to another. So collectively we say this is number 25 and this is number 26 and the 24 vertebrates. So that's why this vertebral column includes those coccyx and the sacrum or the sacrum. So that's about the axial skeleton vertebrae. So these two bones are hip bones. Can call them ilium hip bone, and this one is a hip bone, one on the left, another on the right. So this top portion is called ilium. The bottom portion it actually pubic. So the one that is in the back is ischium. Why it is ischium? And when I was an undergrad, I remembered because you sit on your butt and it's too itchy, and you remember that it's ischium. So ilium, pubis, and that is ischium. Do you really need to memorize all those three names? Hip bones. That's it. For our class, that's enough. And they articulate, not really, they do not kind of articulate, right? So they're kind of fused to a sacrum, kind of. They are fused to a sacrum. So what articulates with the hip bone at the region of ilium is a femur. So let me actually isolate. So even though there's probably a cartilage, right? So that's where the sacrum will be connected. So, but I wanted to show you this opening, that fossa. That's where a humerus or humor, not, I'm sorry, femur, humerus is your upper arm, your femur bone, the knob or the head of the femur will articulate with the hip bone, with the ilium region. So now let's talk about lower extremities. So remember I said that there are 30 bones in the upper extremity or your entire, right? We say arm, right? But what is arm? Upper arm, forearm, your wrist, right? That's your wrist. That's your palm. These are your fingers, your digits. So give me your hand. So this is a hand, but the entire thing, right, is your arm. Let me pause for a second. It is hard to record when you have two other knuckleheads, my children, who's also in the school. So So 30 bones in your hand and 29 bones in the lower extremity, in the leg, let's say, right? But we're not calling the entire thing leg. 29. So here are the 30 and here are the 29. And I will show you the difference why there are 29. So the thigh bone is a femur that articulates with the ilium, with the hip, right? Hips. But we are in human biology class, so it articulates with actually with ilium and with the pubis, right? So it's here, right? It's like in a line. So in the distal part of this bone or the femur, right, articulates with the tibia, which is the medial bone, and the fibula, which is a lateral bone. So the tibia are medial bone because it's close to the medial line, similar to ulna, because two ulnas on left and right are medial bones. So now there's a patella, that's a kneecap. It's not floating, right? Now it's floating, but if I add a connective tissue, right, you will see that it's there. So it protects. So with these ligaments, and remember, the ligaments is the bone-to-bone connection, and the tendon is the muscle-to-bone connection. So, right, so it protects the internal structure, of internal structure, right? Right here, there's a lot of ligaments, and again, not talking about functionality for now. And further down, which is distally, so these two bones, tibia and fibula, articulate with a tarsals. So in our wrist, we call them carpals, but here we call them tarsals, and there are 7 of them. So the 30 bones collectively in your upper extremity, and there are 8 carpals, but here are 29 bones because there's 7 tarsals. So that's where the difference is, tarsals. So there are 2 important ones that you need to remember and memorize the name of this 2 other 2 tarsals. Why? Because they're important, because they support the entire weight. So one is a calcaneal, right, your heel bone, and on top of the calcaneal actually sits that talus. That's the talus bone. And if I will isolate or hide others, right, talus. And the talus articulates in 3 positions. Here with metatarsals, here with a tibia, and it also sits on top of the other tarsals. Actually, on top of, right, on top of the other tarsal, which is the calcaneal. Here, calcaneal. So, and there's the tarsals, and you do not really need to remember their names, actually. But for example, I have flat feet, and I have collapsed arches. So basically I have an arch, right? So, and this arch collapses, right? So collapsed arches. So, and one of the navicular bone, which is the tarsal, right, is kind of sticking out. So it's pulled right to the right. So for example, this one is like moved a little bit medially. So sometimes it's painful, depends on the boots, actually like a snow boot, not the snow boots, ski boots. When I put the ski boots, because there's a plastic, or roll blades, it's kind of painful because it's like sticking out like that. All right, so let's stay on the subject. So there are 7 tarsals, and similar with our hand, right, or palm. So these first 5 are metatarsals, and then similar to our digits or fingers, also there are 14 of them. 3 multiplied by 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 bones, right? Multiplied by 4 would be 12, and plus 2 would be 14. So lower extremity versus the upper extremity, we have 29 bones. So that's all on this, on that, right, and right, everything below the skull. So now let's talk about cranial bones. We're not going to discuss all of them, I'm not going to discuss all of them. So we'll discuss some of them. So the chin, this part, is the manubrium. I'm sorry, manubrium. Manubrium is the mandible. That's the manubrium. Mandible. That's your chin. This is a maxilla, and there are two parts to the maxilla, one part and another part, left and right, so it's fused there. Usually fuses at the age of 11, 12, 13, 14, but I'm not the specialist. You have to talk to physicians and they will probably will be able to tell you, but fluctuate. So this little holes over here, right, that's a foramen. Here and here, here. So little holes are called foramen. These big holes, openings, right? Not holes, openings are called sinuses. And this is a sinus. So, but these little holes are foramen and foramen. So the nerve cords, the nervous system will be fed through that tissue. Not really sure if the blood vessels will go through that, but most likely yes. So one of the biggest foramen in one of the cranial bone. I will show it to you later. Actually, let's do cranial bones now, and then we'll do facial bone. So the first cranial bone that I want to talk about is the frontal. So that's your frontal bone, frontal plate, cranial bone or cranial plate. And this lines are called sutures. So this frontal bone or this frontal cranial bone is connected to parietal bones. Two of them are parietal. One is to the left and another is to the right. So this is the parietal bones. On the side, we have two temporal. One is to the left and another is to the right. They also connected or fused over time. They're fused one to another. So these are called sutures. And another one is that in the back is occipital. So that one is occipital. So there's frontal, parietal, and occipital. The one is in posterior. So, but if I will isolate, hide others, this big hole, that's where the nerve cord will be passed through, right? Brain stem will get through because the brain sits here and the fossa of this bone. So the brain stem will go through this called magnum foramen, big one, like magnum, huge, magnum foramen. I even like to pronounce it with a deep voice, magnum foramen or foramen. So this is the bones. That's the cranial bones. There are more of them, but for our class, yeah, there are other two that I want to mention. Sphenoid bone. So sphenoid is one. If I will hide others, you see that it looks like a sphinx, like a butterfly. I don't know what it is, but it looks crazy, right? So all this notches, ridges, holes of foramen, fossas. What I'm describing right now is just bone markings. So that's a sphenoid bone. Again, functionality we're not discussing for now. And here inside, let me highlight that, it's ethmoid bone. If we hide others, that's ethmoid bone. Looks like, to me, looks like a cockroach, right? So ethmoid bone, and that's how you remember. And sphenoid bone, sphinx. That's how I used to remember, but you can come up with your own style of remembering. And that's as far as we're gonna and the cheekbones are zygomatic bones, right? The cheekbones also the zygomatic and they fuse. So it's very easy to break them if you're I don't want to say like if you're a boxer or whatever you punch people in, but do not do this, right? Um, The facial bones, there are 14 facial bones, so we're not jumping in that. So basically, this is the lesson for today. Let me look at something that we're missing out. Let me pause for a second. Yeah, the thing that I, one thing. So the sutures, right? So this suture that is between the frontal bone and parietal bone is coronal suture, right? So that's where you wear your crown. So we call it coronal suture. I don't know if you have a crown, but that's how I remember. I don't have a crown, but it's coronal suture. So this one in the middle medial line is a sagittal, right? Sagittal suture. This one. This in the back, posteriorly, part my French. This is a lambdoid suture because it resembles the letter lambda, Greek, Latin. And this suture is a squamous or squamous, like the squamous cells, like flat cells here. This is basically everything that I wanted to discuss today for a skeletal anatomy, not the physiology. So the skeletal physiology will be discussed in another lecture. Again, let me pause for a second and maybe I'm missing on something. Yeah, so here when two pubis, one pubis left and right pubis, when they fuse, let me add the connective tissue. This part, this little part that is highlighted, it is a pubic symphysis, right? Or interpubic disc, like intervertebral discs between the vertebrates. Like if I will turn back here, this is the, with the connective tissue. Right now I added connective tissue like ligaments and some other connective tissue. So this is the intervertebral disc to absorb shock, right? For shock absorption. Again, not talking about functionalities. So that's where the pubic symphysis. And with this, let me undress this. And with this, I want to finish this lecture. All right, so I hope you are fine with whatever we went over. So you will find this here. Now, let me share the screen actually. So please go to study guides for your study guides, and that's going to be here under in the playlist. So this new anatomy physiology skeletal system, I will put it under playlist, which is called anatomy physiology. So, and for more of this type of lessons, just go there, and that's the quick study guides or the share notes that will help you for the exam. All right. Have a nice day. Take care.